Shivendra Singh, and on behalf of a suitable agency, I welcome you all to this very special session of Suitable Conversations. This is the first session of the new season. This afternoon, we are delighted to bring together two wonderful writers, Saharu Nusaiba Kananari and Jai Arjun Singh, who will be in conversation on storytelling for our times. Saharu burst upon the literary scene earlier this year with his immensely powerful debut novel, Chronicle of an Hour and a Half. He lives in a small town called Arikode near Calicut, and he completed his BA from Aligarh Muslim University and MA from Jawaharlal Nehru University. Chronicle of an Hour and a Half, published this year, has garnered widespread acclaim and has been featured on the shortlist for every major book award in the country. His next novel, The Menon, is slated for release in the middle of next year. Regarded as one of the most respected and influential voices on popular culture. His books include The World of Funny since 1983, about the making of the cult comedy film, and the anthology The Popcorn Essayists. His columns, reviews, and essays have appeared in dozens of publications and are available on his culture blog, Jabberwock. After their conversation, Jay will open it up to the audience, and that will provide you a chance to ask what's on your mind. Books of both these writers are available for sale here, so you could check them out and get your copy signed by the writers here if you wish to. Many thanks to our partners, Suitable Nursery, Sundar Nursery, for this wonderful series of conversations. That's it from me. Over to you, Jay, and thank you.
Thanks, Shivendra. Thanks. Is this okay? Is the sound okay? Yeah. Just let us know if there's a problem, please. Yeah. So as Shivendra said, one thing I'll just start by saying, when I spoke on the phone, he instructed me very seriously to not use too many positive adjectives or to be too effusive about the book when I'm talking about the book. And
I did not say that to say that.
But the thing is that I do understand it as a writer. I do understand that impulse. It can get embarrassing and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Too much of the book jacket blurb language, in your presence. So I'll try to tone it down when it comes to talking about this book, which is difficult because it's a book that I really love. I've read it twice now. First when it came out a few months ago, and then last week. I reread it last week for this session. I read it even more the second time because I was reading it without having to grapple with the large cast of characters, with their many interlocking narratives and interrelationships. I just went into it and I could see things in it that I probably hadn't seen before. For those of you who haven't read it, we're not going to really get into spoiler territory or anything, but it's basically a collection of these first-person narratives that together build this story. And it's a story set in a small Kerala village during a very rainy week. The narrative on the face of it might seem to be a straightforward one. The plot is about an adulterous relationship between a middle-aged married woman and a young boy who's young enough almost to be her son, and the effect that this has when it comes to light on this village and on all these people whose voices we hear over the course of the book. But a plot summary is only one thing that can be said about a book, and what's far more interesting, far more artful is the way in which Saharu has constructed the story, often implicating the reader in some very dark things. And we'll talk about all that in a while. I just want to start by, I also want to say quickly because WhatsApp plays a big part in this book. So if any of you see me picking up my phone and looking into it at some point during the session, I'm not checking WhatsApp, I'm checking my notes. And Saharu is not even on WhatsApp, which is something we'll talk about a bit later. Shedu, I wanted to just start by talking to you about the process of world building for this novel, how this novel came to be. Because it's a cliche and a truism that most first-time writers, when they write their first novels, they try to do something autobiographical. Maybe they try to about how it started. I noted that the story is set in 2016. Is that right? It's set in 2016. It's not actually set in the current day. So I assume that was around the time that you started writing it or started thinking about it. If you could tell us about the process and how you decided on this particular narrator structure.
The book was not, I didn't start writing it in 2016. So my first novel was set in 2014. My second novel was set in 2015. My third novel was this. I don't put much importance on this as well. What I think is important to me is that I have a story to tell. And I have a story to tell which artistically involves me, allows me to explore some of the fundamental and plain complexities that we see in our daily lives. So I'm to talk about plot. I always say this to Amber is the primary victim of my whole confessions. But I'm not a very intelligent person. I'm not capable of drawing complex plots. But however, what I'm capable of, so in an evolutionary biology, there is this specific word called, spandrels, which is, the leftovers of evolution and which have lost their purposes. So the creatures tend to repurpose them for, available stuff. So in the same way, since I'm not very intelligent, I have grown very intuitive, I think. I have been consistently finishing work after work, whether they were getting published or not. And in that, to answer the first part of your question, how I ended up writing a story, which, which is like this. So I conventionally followed, certain unconventional people. Like Cormac McCarthy, who once said that, don't do anything. Don't be a writer if it's a secondary thing. Everything when you're a writer, everything has to take a distant second place in your life, and this is except for my mother. Everything else takes a distant second place to me. And the other thing that I followed was Don DeLillo's very great advice. Everything that Don DeLillo said is great is mine. Everybody who knows me knows Don DeLillo also. So he said that in order to become something, you have to consciously try to be, not being anything else. And this I understood. And in order to become a writer, I understood that you have 2-3 bad books to write. It doesn't mean that you consciously try writing bad novels which others wouldn't publish. You write under the faith that this is going to get published. But eventually, when the first 2-3 books are not published, you get really grateful to the agents and the publishers who rejected them, because that would have basically done you in. So I think I improved, but to talk about the structure of the book, this ought to be the influence of William Faulkner's As I Lay Dying, very great writer in my personal pantheon. And As I Lay Dying is also a very, very rich and complex book which deals with a family which when I first read sounded like an Indian family. In which a mother is dying and the father is sitting idle and the kids are everywhere. And as she lay dying, her first son is shaving woods in order to make a coffin for her. And then she has this deathbed wish saying that I would like to be buried in my hometown in Jefferson. And then the novel revolves around multiple narrators telling the story of, this transportation of Addie Bundon, the mother figure, after she died, to her familiar cemetery in Jefferson. This was the primary influence for the structure, and not very inventive. I steal wherever I find an opportunity, including plot, everything.
But I think it's very interesting that you're talking...
Including the sweater that I wear.
No, it's interesting you're talking about mother also as a priority, but it's that's one of the things. I think the second reading helped me pay a little more attention to the structure of the book, because the first reading typically you're unpacking what's happening, and even if you're a critic and you're sort of looking at it closely. But the second reading, I was looking a little more closely at the prose and the structure, and there's something struck me. So so the first two voices in the book that we hear are the voices of mothers, or of two middle-aged women who are primarily defined by this society as mothers and as wives, and who are part of the tradition of this particular world that the novel is set in, where women are primarily seen as repositories of a community's honor, and other things like individual self-expression, or freedom of expression, privacy in a consensual relationship. These things are secondary, or maybe they don't even exist. But the first two voices we hear are the voices of two mothers, and those are also the last two voices we hear. And in fact, both the last two first-person voices end with the same four words. That's something I noticed when I was reading it. And the first line of the book is one woman saying, this is the mother of Burhan, who's one of the protagonists of the book. He gave me 5 children and then he rested, like God after creation. And then the second first-person voice, which is by Rehana, is my husband gave me everything, including his kidney. And there's a little, there's a connect between those lines as well. There's a poetic refrain somewhere here, in the structuring, which is very, very interesting. With these two women's voices bookending the novel, considering that so many of the voices in between are the voices of men from, across different continuums, all responding to what has happened. Was that structure also part of your initial design, or did it just happen during the writing process?
I do not have any such a design in my head. I'm very empty-headed actually. I usually write immediately after waking up. I wake up around 4:30 and I continue till 8:39. And I do the same in the evening. I sit down by 5 and go through it until 9 o'clock, or sometimes 10 o'clock, sometimes 11 o'clock. If nothing is coming out, then 12 o'clock. It's an eternal wait for something to come. It's so these two characters. So there are two things that I wanted to bring in. Which one was that there is a mob lynching over an extramarital affair. But another thing that I wanted to portray was an Indian mother. It's not that I speak about my mother. It doesn't mean that I love my mother more than everybody else. But I tend to publicize it a bit about it. I was traveling with Amber here, and we were talking about literature, and I mentioned ragtime. You'll talk about ragtime, in which he calls the affection for mothers a 19th century movement, in which he counted Abraham Lincoln and Harry Houdini, etc., as its major proponents. My intention was to give a picture of hardship of an Indian mother, which is emotionally, physically, perhaps the most draining experience all on earth. Because being an Indian mother, you are allowed to, you are forced to become not anything else. You are only mother. There is no other role for you in your life. So. But at the same time, these two figures, Nebisum and Rehana, are radically different from one another. and they respond to the same situations also differently. Nebisuma is a woman who is restless, who is always at work. She works like the clocks of the hand, in the hands of the clock. But Rayhana is a woman who is at rest. She's rich. She had brought up her children, but afterwards she had been sitting idle. This is what she's saying. And so these two, one is a mother who is, idealized, who sacrifices everything for the sake of children and family, which is the figure which is commonly worshipped in Indian society as the ideal mother figure. And the other hand, there is on the other hand, there is an opposing figure in Rayhana, who has these thoughts, who understands these from a, let's say, feminist vantage, because when I was writing it, some people pointed out to me that these characters seem to be too self-conscious about, their condition, given that they were from a rural society. But my answer is that feminism is an incredibly powerful and most impactful movement in human history. A lot of things that has happened that feminism has brought in the world cannot be anymore walked back. And these reflections, if such an impact, such a movement has such an impact all over the world, it necessarily reflects in the village women also. And I live in village. I'm not a Naban guy. I live among these mothers and kids and men and women like this, those in the novel. And I can tell you that this vocabulary is available to most women, and these conversations around what they are supposed to be and what they would like to be is a very daily thing on dinner table, or even as you sweep the yard, women just curse it. They don't like it anymore, and that is reflected also in the changes that is ushering in with the new generation. Because in our area, no kids, no girl comes of 18 years of age without a scooter of her own. So it's a new version of Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. You have a scooter of your own these days. So Rayhana is a completely different figure who many people may not agree with as as an ideal mother, model mother in Indian context, because she does feel that she has a right to pleasure. But at the same time, she is not a perfect victim, because she's an extremely color-conscious person. And she doesn't have much of a case against her husband. Her husband seems to be completely out of place in all this, in the entire narrative. But she does call him as dark as a crowd. I married him despite him being dark as a crowd, dark as a magpie. She calls her own body as, I saw in Burhan's my body in all its milk, because she's so fair. So this is the thing that, any character, this is again goes back to the conversation that we had earlier and last April also in book shopping, that characters are never perfect. I was reading yesterday and I noticed that John Reb was a Nazi. Is a much revered figure in China because he during the rape of Nanjing, the Nanjing massacre, in which supposedly, I'm not sure the exact number, but 250,000 people were slaughtered by the Japanese. During the rape of Nanjing, John Reb basically protected hundreds of men and women whom he hosted and essentially protect them against the army violence. So how do you judge this person? And this is mostly the case with every victim. So in this novel, the two victims, one is Rayhana, who is an extremely color-conscious person, whose truths are true, whose suffering is suffering, whose pain is felt, but at the same time, she also is, privy to a certain kind of privilege in our society, which is skin color. Skin color is, I was telling in somewhere, I was talking and I was telling that none of you want Nawazuddin Siddiqui in Kuch Kuch Hota Hai. And there is no good reason why you don't want him there. There is absolutely no good reason. You want to say that no, he's so sexy, you cannot, you can't stop yourself, I used to hear these words in JNU, but do you really? Do you really want him in Kuch Kuch Hota Hai? No. I can tell you no. You want a pretty Savarna, the North Indian says, wheat colored person, because now that's what now, this is the first time I heard in my life when I came to North India, there is a color called wheat. So I thought that, I would nowadays on, I wouldn't call myself dark, I would call myself brown. Since they are wheat, I'm brown. But this color consciousness is, is so universal in all over the world. But since we are talking about India in India, that you don't want your men and women in the movie in that color. If such a being born in such a society, both its men and women are supposed to have skin color preferences, and Rehana is a person who thinks that. By virtue of having a fair skin, she was entitled to have a fair man as well in her life, but she compromised that because the guy was rich. And why did the guy marry her? Because the society has convinced the husband of Sadiq that you are so dark skinned that you're good for nothing. And unless you are a very rich, fair-skinned woman is coming near you. So he basically exploits his, leverages his financial position to marry a fair woman. So these are all complex reflections of a society in which you cannot point out a perfect victim.
Yeah, and this is the sort, again, for those of you who haven't read the book and will be reading it, this is the sort of complexity you see everywhere in the novel, which is something that's so, and the conversations you mentioned just now, one being the one that we had on the phone. We had a very nice phone conversation a few days back, and I don't know if we really